Welcome to Escaping the Echo Chamber. This is going to be the most in-depth breakdown of the Joe Rogan situation that you'll see on YouTube, and more importantly, of how this affects the Black community and how we take control of the narrative. There are a lot of people in the Black community who are frustrated with the Joe Rogan situation, and it's time to talk about what we need to do to protect our community. Joe Rogan has a huge podcast that is one of the biggest podcasts on the planet. He has a huge following and is potentially more influential than major media networks. People on the left have been criticizing Joe Rogan for some time because of his growing popularity and his willingness to invite right-wing guests on to have conversations. Some weeks ago, the criticism escalated after Rogan had experts on his show that were highly critical of the mandates that Democratic politicians are supporting. That's when the campaign to shut him down reached a fever pitch. They claimed he was spreading medical misinformation and getting people killed. In addition to criticism from major media and lefty social media, musicians Neil Young and Joni Mitchell publicly stated that they would pull their music from Spotify if Rogan remained on the service. At this point, Rogan comes out and says, "From now on, if I have a controversial guest on these types of issues, I'll make sure to have an expert with an opposing view on afterwards for balance." Spotify also chimed in that they would put labels on Rogan's content to advise listeners if he is covering that sort of medical information. But the campaign didn't end there. Rogan had an interview with Jordan Peterson, who's a pop psychologist popular amongst the right wing. During the interview, they talked about Michael Eric Dyson, who debated Jordan Peterson a few years ago. Let me just give you some background on the Jordan Peterson-Michael Eric Dyson debate. Jordan Peterson had become popular for criticizing identity politics, white privilege, and political correctness. The debate was actually about political correctness, and some of Jordan Peterson's points were that white privilege doesn't exist and that Black people cry racism over nothing. That last point is very important because Jordan Peterson has been hyped up and lauded as some sort of intellectual behemoth because he pretends racism is a figment of Black people's imagination, and that we need to just stop being so whiny about it. And he cloaks these tired talking points in pseudo-intellectual babble, which makes it seem that he actually knows what he's talking about. Michael Eric Dyson, whether you agree with him or not, is a wordsmith who presents his arguments almost in a poetic prose that is clearly heavily influenced by his appreciation of hip-hop. This brings us to the point in the debate where Peterson and Dyson are going back and forth quite energetically, and Michael Eric Dyson points out, for all of Jordan Peterson's talk of victim mindsets and snowflakes, that Jordan Peterson's characterization of being persecuted is pure fantasy, and he's quite successful and doing very well. But he's just a mean, mad white man. Yes, Michael Eric Dyson called him a mean, mad white man, and Jordan Peterson absolutely lost it. His voice became even higher pitched than usual, and while stuttering and stammering, Jordan Peterson called Michael Eric Dyson a racist. Jordan Peterson accepts the possibility that he might be mean, but gets mad and claims that Dyson is racist for mentioning his race. Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson discussed this debate during the interview, and Joe Rogan mentions Michael Eric Dyson calling Peterson a mean white man, and comments that he thinks Dyson is wrong because Jordan Peterson isn't mean. Jordan Peterson, for all his complaints about people claiming racism, once again fixates on the white part of the statement, at this point claiming that he's not really white either, he's kind of peach-colored. And Rogan responds that, well, yeah, Dyson isn't really Black either. In fact, noting that most people that are labeled Black do not actually have Black-colored skin. This then becomes the next wave used to attack Rogan and to call for his removal from Spotify. This is the first incident they used to label him racist, claiming that he has questioned Michael Eric Dyson's Blackness. Most Black people were able to acknowledge the difference between commenting on the actual color of our skin and questioning our Blackness. The ironic thing is that those who tried to capitalize on this event to say that he was questioning our Blackness have no problem supporting Joe Biden, who actually questioned the Blackness and authenticity of Black people who did not vote for him. That attempt went nowhere, but led people digging and soon finding something big. That's what brings us to the clip of Joe Rogan saying the N-word so many times and to his Planet of the Apes story. And this was something that caught people's attention and had Black people looking at Joe Rogan like, what the f? This is the event that had India Arie say that she wanted to pull her music from Spotify. And she said some other things, but we'll get to that later. In addition to saying the N-word repeatedly throughout the years, Joe Rogan told a story about going to see the movie Planet of the Apes in a Black neighborhood and said of that neighborhood that he walked into the Planet of the Apes. You would think that in 2022, we would be past the blatant and rampant anti-Black racism. Well, some of us would think that. But we're tired of the constant disrespect. It goes beyond disrespect. It goes to the behaviors that come along with the disrespect that are a very serious problem. It's the denied loans, the police brutality, the unfair business practices, the murders, and so much more. And seeing someone with as much as a following as Joe Rogan, with so many people following him and defending him, seems like definite cause for us to be concerned, because if he is an open and unrepentant racist, does this mean his millions of listeners share those anti-Black attitudes? Because if they do, that means the danger is so much more real than most of us could have imagined. But we are seeing more and more evidence that anti-Black racism is extremely common, and we have to ask ourselves the question, can we stop others from being racist? And if we can't control if other people respect Black people, if we don't control the platforms they're on, we've got to start looking for other solutions. The ball was now in Rogan's court, and it was up to him to do something after being called out for his past racist statements. I wasn't expecting him to do what he did. For one thing, he pulled a bunch of episodes of his podcast off of Spotify. And he also recorded and released an apology. He talked about how horrible the clip of him saying the N-word over and over looked, and how he now believes white people shouldn't use that word in any context, which is exactly what India Arie had said. He said that this was the most regretful and shameful thing he had to talk about publicly. He said that he did not use the word to be racist and that he's not racist, but whenever you're in a situation where you have to say you're not racist, you've clearly f***ed up. And then he talks about the Planet of the Apes story and how he deleted the whole podcast episode and admitted that out or in context that it sounded horrible. He offered his sincere and humble apologies and said it makes him sick just watching that video. There are several interesting things about the Planet of the Apes story. He says the story is from 11 years ago, and after saying that he walked into the Planet of the Apes, a few seconds later, he interrupts the story to say that was a racist thing to say. That's what he said right then during the story, completely of his own volition. And then he finishes the story, which I want to get back to later. At this point, a lot of Black people are still pissed off, and some people aren't satisfied with Rogan's apology. Some are angry that he's still on Spotify and just feel that there's not enough being done. Some in the Black community continue to criticize Rogan, but not everyone in the Black community felt the same way. There were some who came to Rogan's defense and were criticized for doing so. There was another point of view I saw from people within the Black community that we should not allow ourselves to be manipulated by the media that has a vendetta against Joe Rogan. That point of view boiled down to asking how their proposed solution of getting Rogan off of Spotify benefited us. But even if the Black community wanted Rogan off of Spotify, guess what? Spotify isn't Black owned. The other platforms waiting to give him a contract if he left Spotify aren't Black owned either. We do not have the direct control over these platforms, and we aren't even the target audience for Rogan. And when we get down to Spotify's bottom line of profit, Joe Rogan makes Spotify a lot of money. A whole lot of money. Long story short, beyond Joe Rogan, if we want to stop people from feeling free to disrespect us, and worse, to spread anti-Black propaganda, we need to actually have control over some media outlets. And even though he still has his podcast, Joe Rogan isn't happy either. Joe Rogan doesn't want to just keep his podcast. He wants to be able to keep his edge. He wants to be able to keep his show open and under his complete creative control. He doesn't want a whole bunch of limitations and restrictions. That's why he's apologized and made some corrective actions, but his problem isn't the Black community. His problem is the establishment wanting to destroy him. You see, the Black community wants assurances that he will not be spewing anti-Black rhetoric and propaganda, but the people who have been after him for some time have a completely different agenda that will not be satisfied until he and any other dissenting voices are completely eliminated. And let's be clear, the same establishment that wants Joe Rogan out of the picture will not tolerate Black voices that do not completely conform to their agendas and approved talking points. Joe Rogan is under the microscope and must watch his step, because his enemies are searching for something to use to justify coming after him. But he still has his wildly popular show and his many millions of dollars. Meanwhile, Black folks who may not have forgiven Joe Rogan have also got to be aware that there are many other people who have used the N-word in a variety of contexts who have been completely embraced by the same machine that is pretending to care about us and that pretends to respect us. You have people like the Young Turks, who would regularly use the actual word when reporting on certain stories, and who have their own N-word greatest hits video out. Anna Kasparian's response was very different from Joe Rogan's, but that didn't get the same level of attention for some reason. There is Howard Stern, who has demonstrated that he is virulently anti-black over decades, but because he attacks Donald Trump with frequency, the establishment loves him. Stern had a particularly vile skit resurface where he wore blackface and used the N-word repeatedly, calling the black people in the skit with him smelly N-words. Both Jimmy Kimmel and Jimmy Fallon have worn blackface and they are under no scrutiny. Then there's Quentin Tarantino, who is someone I particularly despise, who intentionally uses and writes the N-word into his movies, clearly just for the fun of it. And did we forget about Justin Bieber and his N-word jokes that he actually recorded and that the entire mainstream media colluded to conceal from the public? After the dust has settled, one thing is clear. Joe Rogan isn't our problem. Our problem is an entire media apparatus that has no respect for black people, and in more cases than we want to admit, is populated by people who are very anti-black and who have large audiences who either don't mind their anti-blackness or who wholeheartedly agree with their anti-black hatred. And at this point, you may agree that the entire media complex is a problem, but you could be wondering why I feel Joe Rogan isn't a part of a problem. There are several interesting things I noticed about Rogan's apology and about Rogan himself. India Arie stated that she doesn't think Joe Rogan is a racist, and some people took issue with that. I do not think I can definitively state that he is or is not a racist. The more important question I ask is Joe Rogan anti-black? There are several things that suggest that he isn't. Rogan's apology is notable, not just for everything in it, but also for something missing from his apology. What I didn't see in Rogan's apology was any mention of his daughter, his black adopted daughter. I've seen so many apologies that come off as insincere that mention black employees, black acquaintances, or black friends. These tend to be the tactics of individuals that are trying to compensate for their racism with the fact that they met a black person once. And in this instance, Joe Rogan has a black stepdaughter whom he adopted that I never heard him mention. And even though he never mentioned her, I wonder if he discussed this situation with his black daughter, who is now 25 years old. In fact, I wonder if her presence in his life gave him a different perspective on racial issues. These are questions I don't have the answer to, but I think would require an actual open and frank dialogue between Joe Rogan and someone conscious from the black community. The other detail reminds me of the Shirley Sherrod case. You may not remember Shirley Sherrod, but in 2010, she was working for the Obama administration when an old videotape of her was released by Andrew Breitbart. Shirley Sherrod, a black woman, was on video telling a story about how she was working with a white farmer who needed help to save his farm. And she thinks to herself about all of the black farmers who had lost their farms and were denied loans and help, and she said that she wasn't going to do her best to help him. Once that clip came out, the blowback was lightning fast. In less than 24 hours, she was forced to resign. The administration was reported to have said that they needed her out before Glenn Beck's show went live. The really funny thing about this is that by the time Glenn Beck went live, less than 24 hours later, more of the video had surfaced and the rest of Shirley Sherrod's story was revealed. The story didn't end with Shirley Sherrod not helping the white farmer. After going through the motions on his case, the bank made moves to foreclose on his farm, and he came back to her desperate on what he could do to save his farm. It was at this point that she said she realized it wasn't only black families that were being failed by the system, but poor white families were also being victimized. And she went all out at that point to make sure she could help the white farmer and managed to help him save his farm. The reason I'm reminded of this case when I'm talking about the Joe Rogan Planet of the Apes story is because I've listened to the entire story. Once you get to the point where he says they walked into Planet of the Apes, it's absolutely disgusting. If you continue to listen a little while longer, you will hear Joe Rogan completely of his own volition, without any prompting, say that was a racist thing to say, which it absolutely was. And for him to pause the story to acknowledge that suggests that he regretted saying that. It also suggests that he is not some hardened anti-black white supremacist. But that's further suggested by the story he continues to tell. As the story progresses, they go into the theater and they are the only white people in the theater. He describes an experience that is different from any other theater-going experience he's ever had, but that is very enjoyable. He further discusses something he realizes watching the movie. Between the previews and the movie, he says, there are almost no black people. In fact, the only black people he sees on screen is the bad guy in the movie, and he's got a British accent. He talks about coming to the understanding of how black people must feel not seeing any black people on screen in the movies and not seeing black representation in American society. I don't know how many people actually stuck around long enough to hear the entire story, but I truly believe that many others within the black community will look at Rogan somewhat differently, as I now do. I'm not saying to give Joe Rogan an NAACP Image Award, but he does seem to be an individual capable of empathy and whom can be engaged in productive dialogue. And then there's India Arie, who had spoken about removing her music from Spotify, who after Joe Rogan's apology said she doesn't think he is racist. Some people accused India Arie of selling out. I look at the situation by asking a question. If the black community demanded Spotify drop Rogan, what would have happened? Let's play it out. Rogan gets dropped, still likely gets his $100 million, and gets offered another major contract by some other platform that wishes to capitalize off his astounding popularity. In other words, Joe Rogan gets even more money and keeps broadcasting his show to millions of viewers. Meanwhile, how does this have any positive impact on the black community? What do we get out of it? You see, Rogan's enemies want him off air to maintain their influence over the populace, which does nothing for us either. So if we allow other people to use our anger, our fear, our trauma to achieve their objectives, we get absolutely nothing. That's why I like what India Arie did. And I'm talking about what she did before Rogan apologized. A lot of people heard her ultimatum to Spotify, but didn't actually hear the details of her Instagram post. In her original post, she offered an alternative to pulling her music off of Spotify. She talked of Spotify increasing how much it pays to musicians since they provide so much revenue to the platform. What I appreciate about India Arie's approach is that she was practical and thinking about a solution. This is something we have to do in all of our responses to these types of situations that are so emotionally charged. The trauma we experience from anti-black hatred is very real, and that is precisely why our responses must be solution-oriented and focused on turning what is harmful to what is helpful. India Arie used this situation as an opportunity to serve the interests of black musicians on Spotify rather than allowing the media to exploit our pain for their own interests. As always, don't forget to hit that thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and let me know what you think about the Joe Rogan situation and what the black community should be doing in these types of situations going forward. I'll see you next time.